So we had a fantastic weekend. I hope you did too. Yesterday was Father's Day. Our city was so happy and so festive because the Blues won the Stanley Cup, which I admit I did not care about anything to do about hockey with hockey. But I am not a full-on bandwagon person because Sarah Bross, who is our, I don't even like, assistant doesn't even come close to what she is in our life. Everybody around us knows how fantastic she is, but she's been a hockey player, a fan her whole life. Her family are Blues fans, and we went to, when did we go to the Blues game? Was that in January? It was before things started to really turn around for them, and I loved it. We were like, we should go to these games more often. So anyway, long story short, it was fun because of her passion, but also just what it did for the beautiful city of St. Louis. So it was a great full weekend. Something else that happened that I think is, you know, we always talk about how things never get old in doing what we do, and some of that is because we're constantly meeting new people. And so just when you think you've heard the most interesting story or experienced something new, someone else surprises you. This weekend, a great guy that we scouted in May at Hangout Fest came, and we sat and had just a great conversation with him. I appreciate many, many things about him. And the reason why I'm sharing it is I think it is so applicable to what I plan on talking about today, which are 3 important questions to ask yourself. And it was so evident that he had asked himself these questions. He's a young guy with a very interesting backstory. As a child, he moved around a lot and he experienced a lot of life, and he hit a crossroads, which I can say that I've hit crossroads. Our children have hit crossroads. We've had models experience it. Crossroads can be a wonderful thing, especially when you stop to ask yourself 3 questions. But what I appreciated about him was his attitude, his zest for life, his enthusiasm for that you can always start over. And guess what? It made us love him even more. It made us want to go to bat for him even more. And I guess in this time of my life when I'm in a very contemplative state of mind, it was just a refreshing reminder that there is always hope. And I don't know what you're experiencing or if you're going through anything, because the reality is we all go through things, but the one definitive thing I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I've experienced multiple times, including this weekend, is that there's always hope. I mean, the cool thing about the Blues too is they were in last place and they end up winning the Stanley Cup. And I'm always on these topics to the point where I feel like sometimes maybe it becomes repetitive, but it's because I've seen it over and over and over and over. I have another great topic that I'm looking forward to next week, and it's all about the value of continuing. So recently I realized that Jeff and I kept coming back to this question that if we were getting ready to take a meeting, we would say, well, what do they want to do? If it's a model who has a goal, the big question is, what do they want to do? Interestingly, we're also at this point, and I've talked about this 20 years in, where you go, okay, we've got this, we're in our groove, we're doing great, we have models doing fantastic, we still love what we do. I mean, that's great. It doesn't mean that there aren't times where we don't love it for a minute. or that we're frustrated or whatever, but at the end of the day, we still love what we do. But it's also, the world is ever changing, and I hope that you're experiencing this in your life too. The world is changing. There's different kinds of opportunities. Just because you've always done things one way doesn't mean that that's always how you have to do them. And that's the beauty of it. That was the beauty of the conversation with the guy that was here this weekend, is that he understood that. He didn't hold himself in his history, which is really important. Or as a model is developing, and let's say they've been in their game for 5 years or whatever the time period is, 10 years. Well, what do you want to do? What's the next goal? What's the vision? You know, I love that there is the verse that if without a vision, the people perish. Without a vision, you perish. You have to continue to ask yourself, well, what do I want to do? You know, it doesn't mean, because the other thing is, it can be a side hustle. It can be a new creative endeavor. It can just be a new hobby. But I really believe that if you don't ask that question, how can you make any kind of a path or a plan? I love Stephen Covey. Back in the day, before this lovely computer and keeping lists on phones, I still always, I have, Jeff's a calendar person that it's on his computer and it's on his phone. I have that, but I also have a calendar on my desk so I can physically look at that, and I can write with my Papermate Flair, and I also have a planner, so I have multiples. I think I just like writing lists. The funny thing is, both Tiana, our oldest daughter Tiana, our next daughter Olivia, and now Willa, they're all list keepers, and I think it's because they always saw me writing things down. And for the girls back in the day, all my old image group girls who are now women living all over the country, you guys remember, I had the giant Franklin Covey planner. It was the size of like a magazine. It was probably like I don't even know how big it was, 8 by 10 or something. It was so big that I could carry it as a notebook. And you would put the dates in and you take it out, and I've saved a few of them and they're hilarious. And that's just like how I like to roll. I also loved Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a good book to dust off every once in a while, to kind of jolt yourself into making sure that you're staying on task. But one of the things that he talks about, I think it was the 2 of the 7 habits, is that you should begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. But what do I want to do? What am I wanting to do? What is the end goal? What would I love to see happen? And then you backtrack from that. Okay, how do I get there? But the first question is, what do you want to do? The second question is, really important question. What do you not want to do? We live in a time where there's never been more distractions, never been more things to keep you off your game, never more things just to create time wasters, things that just literally steal your time, social media, games, things that keep you busy, but the last thing that you are is effective. Or with all of our crazy schedules, the autopilot of life. I observe that so often on the freeway, where people are just, you know how when the Wizard of Oz and the Wicked Witch was like, you're just driving, you're just going to the next place, but you're not stopping to think, what do I want to do and what do I not want to do? We literally, before I started the podcast, Jeff read a post of somebody in our life who made a reference to basically a bad relationship. And we were both going, wow, it's history repeating itself. History repeats itself when you don't stop and think about not only what you want to do, but what you don't want to do. And when our unique position of scouting and meeting and finding people in random places means that we find people from all walks of life, all socioeconomic backgrounds, every different mindset. I'm reading a fantastic book that I love. I think I've read every book of Margaret Batterson, and I'm reading a book about whisper, and the concept is, in order to hear God, you have to know that he's going to whisper, so you have to get really quiet, because that's how he speaks. And it's in that quiet that you can find some peace in deciding what you don't want, and how little things add up, and making choices that can keep you out of maybe a history that has happened in your life previously, or generations. We've seen that sometimes it's hard, extra hard, for two kinds of people, I think. It's extra hard for somebody who has kind of had a cushy life, because, you know, maybe there's not that hunger to dig down deep and go for a dream. And then on the other side of the coin, sometimes it's hard for somebody who's only known struggle or only known poverty to believe that, guess what? Life can be full of opportunities. You just have to believe it and receive it and go for it and not overthink. Because otherwise you can get an autopilot and you just end up living and not setting a path for where you want to go. And some of that comes from that second question of, what do you not want to do? Because that can determine a lot of just your daily behaviors of what you're going to do. And then the last one, and this one is a fascinating thing to me. It's helped me in my journey, and maybe that comes too from being around long enough that all of a sudden you're at an age where you go, look, if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. And failure, there's the air quotes of this week, failure, that I don't even think that is, failure is just a way to learn. You learn another lesson, or you figure things out. I mean, failure is part of success. The third question is, what are you afraid of? And there's times where we have models that I know deep in their heart they would really like to do this, but because of the voices in their head, which is 9 times 10, not only the voices in their head from other people, but also, even more importantly, and this is something that's been really so fascinating to me lately because it keeps coming up, is what do you say when you talk to yourself? How are you talking to yourself? But what are you afraid of? What's holding you back from, if you know what you want to do and you know what you don't want to do, then it comes, what are you afraid of that's going to keep you from ultimately what the end in mind is? What is that thing? You should be much more afraid of the risk you don't take. Much more afraid. Because you can get to a place in life, and I've talked about that recently too, where people get to the end of their life and they think, all the things that I thought I was going to do, I just didn't. It's never too late. You could Google and probably find a million stories of people doing things later in life. I think I did a podcast about that recently. I know I did. And you want to know what? Half the time I'm doing these podcasts too to encourage myself. It's for you, but it's also for me. David encouraged himself. Mary encourages herself. It's just part of the game. I know God doesn't give you the spirit of fear. That comes from people and not good thoughts. So here's our lesson of this Mother Mary Monday. 3 questions. Take the time to ask yourself them. Number 1, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Now and down the road, like what's the end in mind? Number 2, what do you not want to do? And be really clear to set up guards that you don't. And finally, what are you afraid of? And whatever that is, brush it to the side, because the reality is diving in and risking and allowing yourself to fail is the only way to success. I thank you for all of the feedback and for always tuning in. I appreciate hearing from you, and I hope that this week is super encouraging to you, and I will talk to you next Monday. That's Papa's cue to come and turn this off. Have a great week.